name is Anne Light, and I'm Professor of Design and Creative Technology at the University of Sussex, and also Professor of Interaction Design, Social Change and Sustainability at Malmö University in Sweden. And this talk today, which I'm calling Redesigning Design for Culture Change, is really about these two worlds meeting and what we need to do to think about our futures. So I'm going to start in the context of the climate crisis, in fact, the climate emergency. And these are pictures that were taken during the school strikes back in 2019, which feels like a very long time ago. But actually, as I'm recording, it's really just over a year. And the point being that in the context of emergency, we need to rebuild our cultures from the ground up. And in Brighton, we see lots of traces of people trying. So for instance, on the wall near where I live, there's an Extinction Rebellion painting. There are protests about peak oil, about the way that we're abusing our lands and seas and reducing things to wastelands. And there comes with that, after a while, a sense that we can't just watch it happen. We can't protest quietly, that actually our day jobs as well as our evenings need to be devoted thinking about what change might look like. And here is a mural. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. And of course, people around us are doing a lot of work to try and improve matters. So these are more photos from Brighton. Zero waste, for fish's sake, bin your litter. So the more than human and thinking beyond yourself, and going plastic free. And these are all really important, as are other kinds of changes in lifestyle. This is a vegan cookbook on display. And of course, this is all really important. But the point is, in a sense now, people are scared. People are mobilizing towards ends that are transforming in completely unhelpful ways. People are digging their heels in. Come to the point now where we actually need to do something about problems that are far more deeply rooted than they were 40 or 50 years ago when people first started to talk about them. So we have fires and droughts and floods happening in some parts of the world already. And for islands with very low profiles, they're already beginning to vanish, which of course is causing migration challenges. And we have, on the other hand, climate denial from big interests. We see a failure of leadership. We're seeing increasing inequality, all of which are problems that are not helping address those other conditions. And on top of that, we have sort of things that are fellow travelers, like the challenges of automation, and a lack of vision that comes with believing that everything can be solved by more technology now. So I come from a different space. My work is in the area of design research, which is the study of deliberate transformation. And as designers, we are people who have some power. We're able to think in visionary ways. And so what I want to talk about today is what designers might do. They might be technology designers, but it could be any kind. Somebody who is used to working transformatively, to think about what else we might transform. Because in the words of something that I said last year, design in its extreme functionality and service to big industry is both the handmaiden of devastation and a possible means of changing this fate. Our practice needs to propel us out of current modes of thought. And for me, the passion has been revealing the designed, therefore designable nature of the world, because futurologists and technologists and policymakers tend to think about the future in professional terms. But for a lot of other people, the future is something that we just stumble towards. We might hope, we might plan, but we don't necessarily see ourselves as the agents of change. And of course, as individuals, we're not necessarily. So on the left here, I've got a picture of something that could be straight out of Blade Runner. On the right, another typical Brighton scene. This is the garden house, and this is another world that's been designed. And both of these are potential visions for the future. One might be a future of urban gardening, and the other might be something that's slick, controlled, and highly tech. And they're not incompatible, but we really need to think about where we're going and how we get there. And one of the major problems, of course, is when I talk about we've got the power, there are power asymmetries. Design is regularly subordinate to business, and human-centered has less weight than profit-centered. So here, and I'm not going to pause and go through all of this, is a list of a whole lot of other ways that institutional humiliation has a digital guise, but you could stop the video and pause here and have a look if you're interested. what has happened in a sense is that we have dreaded some of the kind of monster ideas that come through with the idea of artificial intelligence or robots and things like that. But they're not really the frightening part of the piece at the moment. It's much more about data aggregation and the things that are happening above the level of nations, but between big technology companies and affecting our lives that we can't control. We can't affect those, and it turns out that nor necessarily can our governments, because even if they were legislating to control, there's so many workarounds when you're this size that you just go and do it somewhere else. And there aren't really people paying taxes in this space either. So we've got something that's quite monstrous. And even while I'm talking to you over technology and absolutely loving it and so grateful that I've been able to get out of my head and into other people's worlds and other people's homes even through this device, there's something else going on with technology that we really have to be able to take control of if we're going to take control of what's happening to the planet. So I want to introduce the idea that this sort of culture and design is a spiral. I'm sure this is familiar. We design the way we do because of the context that we're living in, the culture of our time. Design responds to those ideas and needs, and it impacts and it changes the culture of the time, and that changes what we design. So we get even more of a spiral. It just goes on like this, and the values change with it. And with that kind of effect going on, we really need to be able to take this in hand and say, what kind of culture do we want? What should we be designing? If we can't fix these effects at local level and governments can no longer contain them with decisive regulation, how do we act as responsible designers? Because of course we do want to go on designing. Can we make transformations in culture? And I would say, is this our job? But it's got to be somebody's job, and it's sort of eluding us at the moment. So perhaps my more important question now is not, is this our job, but how might we do it? And I'm in the process of working on a book called Designs to Reshape Humanity, Integrity and Cunning in the Anthropocene. And this is where eventually there will be a cover picture when it gets done and dusted and finished. But the principle of the book is, I hope, a positive one, which is to say that we can't give up designing. We can't stop now. We can't suddenly become people who are entirely about doing less of this, doing kind of constrained things, being controlled all the time. Because the joy that comes in being alive comes from making connections and making things and planning and having hopes and moving towards something, all of which are different forms of design. So people are going to want to carry on expressing their individuality and creativity and working together and making things happen. And at the moment, I think too much of the climate narrative is about stepping back, doing less. Yes, we're using far more resource than we have, something like 3 to 5 times the planet. But the answer is not to say, let's stop doing everything. The answer is to say, how do we change what we do? How do we live together differently? How do we create cultures that care more for the process of making and traveling than for arriving and possessing? So not to make things that we squander, but to make different kinds of things, to make new cultures. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to talk for the rest of this talk about tweaks in time. We can redesign time, or certainly time horizons. The great philosopher Simone de Beauvoir said, "A condition brought about at a certain time can be abolished at some other time. It might seem that natural condition is beyond the possibility of change. In truth, however, the nature of things is no more immutably given once and for all than is historical reality." And so we're back at the designed, therefore designable nature of the world. And we're coming in to intervene in culture by considering time horizons. So when we think about time, quite often we think of ourselves in a present with a past rapidly disappearing behind us and a future ahead. And I'm gesturing. Even when you talk to people in a different language, apparently, they might have time going up here and down here. It might come through the middle of them or go out the back. So even our conceptions of where time is and how we visualize it is very different for different people and exists differently in different cultures. But I want to talk particularly about how, as Westerners, we have tended to think in what some design anthropologists so brilliantly described as a close present, the present of a recent yesterday, limited now and almost tomorrow. A skillful utilization of a level of ignorance which places material concerns of the far past and far future to one side, to enable the creative practitioner to pretend that they are starting from a clean slate and thus attain an ethical comfort with the idea of projecting a new object into an unknown future. And as I said somewhere else, timescales and the temporal nature of judgment need revisiting, looking carefully at long-term dynamics without designing for either empire or obsolescence. So when we play with this, how do we see ourselves in time rather than somehow on the spur of time running forward? How do we work so that we're not designing for things that are going to pin us to something for a long time at a point when so much is uncertain, but simultaneously use fewer resources and waste less? And so as a thought experiment, and as a designer, I like making things, so I'm making something. It's called the slender now. And I'm arguing that we can resist the temporary contracted close present I was describing, which is often seen in mainstream design. It's certainly seen in shareholder profits. We can get a sense of ourselves in time. We can adopt a slender now, a point traveling forward in time with us where different trajectories intersect and different versions of possibility exist. It's a horizon concept. And in the slender now, respect for far horizons coexists alongside designing with for agility. It's so slender that it's vulnerable to things speeding into it, yet lithe enough to dance and dodge. And it is not the absence of time or the dodging of responsible innovation, but a horizon built on the acknowledgement of uncertainty. And it gives rise to a whole set of different kind of questions, such as what kind of technologies can be remade and remade without committing us to unsustainable ways of living? What is community infrastructure for rapid and evolving change? How do we achieve flexibility without an appeal to the throwaway? How do we ensure that advantages that attach to flexibility benefit everyone, rather than keeping on hand an agile set of workers for growing capital? And how do we accept flux and prepare for the absence of a sense of direction? Because one thing uncertainty does is destabilize things. We don't know where we're going. We just know that we're going to travel more. So we might be designing to be endlessly different, designed for the unknowable, driven by a sense that the patterns we knew are not holding, attend to possible paths. Not designed for empire, be careful of the long now, even though it was supposed to enable us. How do we know what's going to be worth doing in 10,000 years? Measure multi-lifespan design with the need to adjust fast and pivot. Regard infrastructure as liability because life will keep changing. And build in points of discretion into infrastructure so that it's modular, so that things can be taken out, so that it can all be shaken up and changed. And ask what is meaningful now, but also ask what is going to be meaningful and what does it mean to travel meaningfully. In practice, I want to give you an example of some work that actually comes out of the fuse box where I'm sitting and where you're going to be kind of watching it virtually on the fuse box pages and WiredSussex. So a few years ago, at the point where I was starting to work on a number of workshops that were designed to enable people to contemplate their ecological citizenship and move away from designing materials things to things that you can just make with old boxes and bits of scrap like this. Phil Jones walked in, and Phil Jones, director here, walked in and said, we need to do something about science fiction. We need to do something about with Philip K. Dick. And so the counterfactual world generator was built. And this is a workshop called On Some Other World. On some other world, possibly it is different, better. There are clear good and evil alternatives, not this obscure admixtures, these blends, with no proper tool by which to untangle the components. So I took something from Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle, which is a great counterfactual novel, and said, what can we do with counterfactuality in just a few hours playing together? What might we practice and learn? Here is the counterfactual world generator. And when you open one of these globes, you get your own, for you, randomly chosen scenario of something that could have been different in the past. So it's one twist in fate, one fork in the road, something that happened differently. And first of all, you imagine what it would mean to the world, and then you chronicle it. And then you think about the values that might be captured in something you might make. And here is one example with a completely different understanding of how energy is used. Here it's being generated and danced with in a very different culture from ours, a very appreciative culture. So here's the kind of brief that you might get if you opened up one of these worlds. Astrid Lindgren, who wrote Pippi Longstocking and is a very well-known Swedish author, and I was working in Sweden with these examples too, becomes Sweden's longest serving prime minister. Now, of course, she was never prime minister, but what would have happened if we'd had somebody, or Sweden had had somebody in charge of the country for a very long period who valued equality, justice, and good fun, and really appreciated what it means to be innovative and put creative issues at the heart of everything? How might the country's economic, environmental, and social welfare and standing in the world have been different? So that's one. Here's one that's very different. It's looking at what happens if there'd been a material difference rather than a political difference. The Brazilian rubber monopoly was broken in 1876 by the British when we took seeds from the rubber tree and planted them in other parts of the world. But in this counterfactual world, Brazil keeps control of rubber. Or here's another one with a different philosophy that goes back more than 2,000 years here, and introduces the very world that we might be talking about, where everything is constantly in flux. And here we go back to Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, who's celebrated for saying, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." And his insistence that ever-present change is the fundamental essence of the universe. And if change is that one constant, how does it make us feel different? So we're so orientated to things being about a state and about things that we can own and about things. So here is one answer, and this picture is of an energy confessional, which came out of one of the scenarios that you've been hearing about. And here you confess your energy use. So it's just another way that, in these cases, energy was not foregrounded. It was not part of the original equation. It's very much something that people just brought because of the levels of concern we have for these kinds of futures. So this has been used with innovators in the UK, with civil servants in Sweden and students, with sustainability researchers and artists. And while it doesn't solve anything, it doesn't make anything, one of the things that we found when we were researching the impact of it is that people remembered it for a very long time. It stays with people. That idea of the fork and how things could have been different stays with people. And that seems to be in itself quite a powerful extra bit of the story. If we're thinking about how we make change, being empowered by forks in our head, that's something that we can work towards. So this is a mechanism for offering a low consumption alternative to designing products and services. If you love to design, why not design things like this? May not be of immediate commercial value, but I think we're going to have to rethink how we understand that. Demonstrate how such artifacts might reflect the values of the regenerative changes we need to embrace. Help people encounter ecological citizenship possibilities in constructive and supportive ways. So yes, there are a lot of questions about how we sustain an economy in this, which I haven't solved. I'm just offering some things that we might think about differently. Because if we're serious about new ways of making, what about designing different ethics, different ways of being and knowing, different ways of thinking about futures, different cultural imperatives, different rituals and different practices, different relational tools? Because if we start to shift things, maybe the overwhelming impact of things that are driven almost entirely for profit, which are sending us over the edge of a cliff with very little recourse to action, they just won't look so attractive. We can respond both broadly and locally to think about humanity and how we consider other living beings. We can promote eco-social justice to motivate others. We can understand the implications of living within bounds and allowing that some people might still need to develop because they haven't got what we have sitting around in this part of the world. Can promote resilience at neighborhood level and resist indiscriminate growth, progress, technology for the sake of it, and other developments related just to financial profit. We can explore regenerative processes to repair, nourish, and sustain, and work to find personal meaning in collaborative environments that promote healthy transformation. And all of the time, we need to care for ourselves and for others. And this is where I think it's so important that we are joyful and that we are makers. So I have some projects that relate to this work and work in a bigger unit. The workshops are my passion, but I'm also involved here in a project called Not Equal, which is all about social justice in the digital economy. And if you're interested in that, I urge you do get in touch with me because I'd love to talk to you some more about how we might be making a difference. And I've been passionate about creative practice and transformations to sustainability for a number of years. And that's now come together in this wonderful European Union project called Creative Practices for Transformational Futures, or that's known as Creatures to us local people who are involved in doing it. So again, if that is something you'd like to know more of, then I urge you, you can't come and talk to me here, but my email, my Twitter name, please do get in touch, snapshot this, pause, take down the details. I'd love to talk to you more if anything I've said is of interest. I also want to thank numerous partners, co-authors, a whole range of funders, participants and people who've inspired me, like Phil Jones of WiredSussex, who are too numerous to mention here. And I thank you so much for listening.